So I poked my nose into Twitter, as I often do when a new episode airs, to gauge how people were reacting to Legend of the Sea Devils, and I think it's honestly quite telling that most people were just discussing the Next Time trailer. Legend of the Sea Devils really feels like the spiritual successor to Doctor Who Flux, and much of the Chris Chibnall era for that matter, in that it suffers from having way too much crammed into the runtime, and consequently none of it really has time to sink in or have any impact, with the exception of the final scene, which we'll get to. The way that the episode is edited makes it seem like it actually overran the time limit and segments had to be cut out, which would go some way to explaining why the pacing is such a mess. Examples include the opening sequence where the Doctor, Yaz and Dan hear screams and run to the village, then it cuts to them having already set up a trap for the Sea Devil with an awkwardly inserted establishing shot which I think is meant to imply the passage of time. Following on from that, the Doctor and Yaz are talking to Madam Ching, and in the next scene with Dan she is already sailing away on her ship. The rest of the episode proceeds in much the same way, jumping from one set piece to the next, sometimes without any logic. Like, how exactly does Ji-hun escape from the prison that the Sea Devils were keeping him in? I guess we're just meant to assume that one of the controls the Doctor sonicked released him somehow, even though it never gets shown. I suppose it's also possible certain scenes couldn't be shot as originally intended due to filming under COVID, but either way it makes for a disorienting experience. While we're on the subject of Chibnall writing tropes, Legend of the Sea Devils contains its fair share of clunky exposition delivery, such as Madam Ching randomly opening up about her backstory to two people she was threatening to kill for being stowaways just moments earlier. The worst example of this though has got to be when the Sea Devil just walks off screen because of a phone call, leaving the Doctor alone with their prisoner so that Ji-hun can deliver some exposition. Like, come on Chibnall, surely you could have come up with a better excuse than that. I wouldn't mind so much if that phone call was actually relevant to the plot in some way, but as far as I can tell it never gets brought up again. So we've delved into the pacing and the structural issues. Now this is the point where I'd normally go on to talk about the themes, however there's a slight hitch in that there aren't any. Mr. TARDIS summed it up best when he tweeted that Legend of the Sea Devils is the type of episode detractors of the show say they want. No message, no moral, nothing to say. Now firstly, my response to that would be don't underestimate the ability of NMDs and reactionaries to read a message into a piece of media even where there isn't one. I mean, just the very fact that the Doctor expresses romantic attraction to someone of the same sex would constitute an agenda for many of those kind of detractors. But it is true that in reality this episode has very little, if anything, to say about anything, which is particularly strange given that it contains the Sea Devils. For those who don't know, the Sea Devils were originally created in the 1970s by Malcolm Hulke, a former member of the Communist Party known for using Doctor Who as a vehicle for social and political commentary. Because yeah, woke Doctor Who isn't a new thing. We're actually going to be discussing Malcolm Hulke and his work on the show in more depth in an upcoming video, so be sure to hit subscribe and stay tuned if that interests you. Both the Sea Devils and their counterparts, the Silurians, were deliberately conceived by Hulke as morally grey antagonists, because they existed on the planet before humans, and so in a sense they have as much claim to the Earth as humans do. They're not aliens. Chris Chibnall himself actually explored this moral dilemma with the Silurians back in Series 5, which makes it even more weird that here the Sea Devils are just treated as interchangeable bad guys, with generic evil villain dialogue like, "Don't make the mistake of thinking I wish to keep you alive." I'm not saying we needed to do the whole Doctor attempts to mediate and broker a deal between the two races but ultimately gets thwarted plot again, because that's been played out enough times already. But the point is there are a lot of interesting things you can do with the Sea Devils, and Chibnall does none of them. And it's a shame, because this is the first time in Doctor Who that the Sea Devils are featured as a primary antagonist, without being in a supporting role to the Silurians or the Master, and they look and sound great too, but this script gives them nothing. Of course, not every story has to provide cutting social commentary, but if you watch my recent video on the Timeless Children, then you'll know that having really good themes can save an otherwise mediocre script. Now, this review wouldn't be complete without discussing Yaz and the Doctor, and let's be real, this was always going to be somewhat underwhelming. I've already made my thoughts quite clear on how the Thasmin arc has been dealt with, or rather not been dealt with up until this point. The Doctor's comment about how she'd date Yaz if she could, but she can't because time always runs out, honestly kind of feels like a fourth wall break. It's just a crushing reminder of the fact that we could have got something more substantial if Chibnall had stopped dilly-dallying around and got on with it sooner. But then perhaps it's for the best rest, since I'm still not convinced that Thasmin is even a story that Chibnall wanted to tell, and I've already been proven correct in my theory that it was never his original intention. For what it's worth, the final scene between the Doctor and Yaz is quite effective, mainly because it's the first time that the episode takes a moment to breathe and doesn't feel like it's racing to get to the next set piece. I like how untidy it is, as real-life emotions often are, with the Doctor clearly conflicted and part of her wanting to embrace having a relationship with Yaz, but also afraid of making that kind of deep long-term commitment to someone, and given her past experiences, that makes perfect sense for the character. That being said, if we don't at least get to see an on-screen kiss in the Centenary special, then I'll be disappointed. So that's Legend of the Sea Devils, a poorly paced story with very little in the way of substance. And I apologise if this just sounds like my conclusion to the Flux video all over again, but what can I say? It's the same old Chibnall. Overall the episode is fine, but it's the kind of entertainment you put on to kill 50 minutes and then immediately forget all about it afterward. I'm Midnight and I travel in space and time. And trains.